It seems like every few years, there's more and more video game franchises getting abandoned, and that really sucks. For every annual Call of Duty or Pokemon getting new stuff all the time, you've got something like F-Zero or Castlevania just sitting around doing nothing, locked away in that Indiana Jones vault just kinda waiting for the call. Where's Mega Man X? I have no idea, but his last original title was in 2005. Yeah, I know. Now we've all got our faves. Growing up, certain game series stood out as being these huge deals that as a kid, you totally expect to keep going long after you turn into dust. Surely, I'm not the only person who thought SSX and snowboarding games would be super rad and cool forever. That last one was pretty underrated too. EA, get back on it. It's been 11 years. There's plenty of reasons for franchises to get dropped or become abandoned, and the number one is usually demand. Easy peasy, the thing don't make money, it don't need to exist, which is a really dumb way of thinking. But as we've learned with countless other games over the last 30, 40 years, quality doesn't always equal sales. But with games, sometimes they'll disappear for really mundane or boring reasons. Like Chrono. Square Enix loved their sequels, and I can't believe that Chrono Trigger is just vibing in the waiting room with its terrible PC port. I'm all for originality, new IPs, and fresh ideas, but sometimes you want to check in on what an old friend's doing. Although that's not always a great idea.
Maybe some other time.
Hope to see you again soon.
It turns out that the list of gaming series, both obscure and beloved, that haven't gotten a brand new release in the last 10 years or so is staggering. So I thought, hey, what if we take a look at franchises that haven't gotten love in a while through the lens of their latest release? As in ActRaiser 2, Syndicate reboot, The Third Birthday. Whether it's good or bad, the last and latest in franchises that have basically gone missing. So pull out those old Jinko jeans, it's time to feel ancient. So yo, it's Austin, and consider this my official petition to bring back Rocket Knight Adventures. It's not like Konami's doing anything with them, and my boy could use some love. We've all got a favorite video game franchise that's gone the way of the dodo. I'm talking like 6 or more years without any news. So, what's yours? I'm not gonna sit here and bore y'all with talk about like 100 different JRPGs from the era, but I sure do miss me some Breath of Fire. What I'm gonna be doing today is taking a look at a list of carefully curated video game franchises that are at this point abandoned, and specifically looking at them through the lens of the final release that they had. Be it terrible sales, the game being a stick in the mud, or developers just wanting to move on, there's plenty to talk about. But before we get started, I got to thank today's sponsor, Empires and Puzzles. Match 3 RPG, let's go. Empires and Puzzles is an award-winning free-to-play match 3 RPG, and this is the kind of thing I love to play on the go. It's easy to pick up, difficult to master, and with evolving RPG mechanics, there's a lot that'll keep you around. You'll have to rely on wit and powerful heroes in order to tackle enemies with special attacks. There's over 400 heroes to collect, each with different elemental alignments and more coming all the time. Train them up with your battle spoils, update their unique talent trees, take on bigger, stronger dudes, and match away. And if you want to make things a little bit more personal, which I do, there's global PvP leaderboards, so you can take it out on people online. I'll mess you up. I mean in the game, because the PvP. And you can invite your friends to play. When you play with your buddies, you get bonus rewards like free gyms and a 10-day VIP pass to keep you going strong. Oh, and also the beach party event's about to get started. From June 12th to July 16th, you'll be able to dive in with 10 all-new heroes, a hot summer theme, and fun power-ups to keep battles interesting. So, if you want a fun new game to play on these upcoming hot summer days, launch the App Store on your mobile device, then download Empires and Puzzles now with my link below. It helps the channel out, and it's a pretty good time. Thanks so much to Empires and Puzzles for sponsoring this video. But for now, we need to go to the Lost and Found to retrieve ourselves some abandoned video game IPs. There's a lot of companies out there with like generation-specific franchises. You had Naughty Dog moving away from cartoony platformers and Rareware doing the exact same thing. Then you have a company like Sega, who's been running at Sonic speed the entire time, but I'm not talking about Sonic, I'm talking about everything else. I sure do love me some Sega, although it seems like they've forgotten about the breadth of unused franchises at their disposal. When Sega were in the console business, they needed exclusives to sell systems, and boy howdy did we get them. If you were a Genesis, Saturn, or Dreamcast owner, you had no shortage of fun games to play. But it also seems like Sega loved making a brand new franchise, put out 2 titles, and then promptly forget about it. For example, Bug, Bug 2, Clockwork Knight 1 and 2, Seaman 1 and 2. Yeah, there's a second Seaman. And none of those compare to the tragedy of this world only getting 2 Jet Set radios. Both, I guess, Grind and Future were fantastic titles in their era, and it's crazy that Sega's not done anything with it. But we're going back a bit further to the 80s, all the way to one of Sega's very first IPs. Before Streets of Rage, heck, even Sonic the Hedgehog, we had Shinobi. These old classic arcade titles were simple. You are Mr. Joe Musashi, ninja extraordinaire. Go to the right and do ninja stuff. Shinobi's one of those franchises that seems to be forgotten about when compared against not just Sega's greats, but also Ninja Gaiden, which was extremely popular around the same time. If there's one of these you need to sink your teeth into, it's Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master. It is peak 16-bit action platforming. It's got a fantastic visual style, the Genesis soundtrack thump is alive and well, and to be honest, any game with a jump kick is a solid one to me. After that, there'd be one 3D title and a spin-off on the PlayStation 2, Shinobi and Nightshade, which are 2 hard-as-nails beat-em-ups that aren't afraid to kick your butt. These were filled with cool combo potentials and impressive bosses, but again, kind of fell short to the beefiness known as Ninja Gaiden. It's history repeating itself. After Nightshade, there'd be a large gap in Shinobi-related releases until 2011, where we'd get simply Shinobi. Headed by Kryptonite Games and not an internal Sega developer, Shinobi 3D was a very early 3DS title, one that was delayed initially due to lackluster 3DS sales. Yeah, remember when this thing was such a bummer they had to introduce the Ambassador program? Well, Shinobi 3D would come out in November of 2011, and it didn't help that reputation much, which is a shame because there's some interesting stuff here. Taking inspiration from the PS2 reboots and not the originals, this game is hard. Weirdly, it's all about points. Hit someone, points. Parry an attack, points. Do big combo, get big points. Plastered all over the bottom screen. Now, the original Shinobis had your classic point systems, but this thing ramped that up to 11, especially considering if you take 1 lick of damage, you're losing them too. And everything wants you to die. Shinobi makes you very aware that you're getting your butt handed to you, which makes sense considering this thing's only a few hours long. Shinobi had a pretty lackluster reputation where a majority of the reviews mostly dinged it for being over-the-top difficult and unforgiving, which I don't necessarily think is fair, but it also doesn't do too much to stand out. Besides, you know, having a level take place on top of an afterburner plane mid-flight, which might be one of the coolest levels in any game ever. But unfortunately, this will be the last we'd see of Joe Musashi, at least in an original game. I just hope that his last appearance isn't in Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, which is cool, but actually technically it would probably be Sega Heroes. Sega, don't let my boy down. The thing is, despite being abandoned as a franchise for well over 12 years at this point, I can actually see Shinobi clawing its way back. It's such an easy concept to reimagine, and there's always going to be a demand for cool ninjas doing cool ninja things. What I can't imagine is Sega holding a huge press conference for hundreds of thousands of people on the internet and sitting everyone down and being like, okay, you've all asked for it. A new Echo the Dolphin. Sega sure has published some weird stuff. There's a lot of games from the 90s from all publishers, really, that are just a sign of the times. Like, I look at Toe Jam and Earl, arguably a much stranger experience, and think, oh yeah, that's totally normal. But in my 33 years of living, I'm not really sure what they wanted to do with Echo the Dolphin, especially because it ended up getting 5 different titles in less than a decade. I'd say Echo was peak Sega weirdness, but it wasn't technically made by them. Created by Appaloosa Interactive, then Novatrade International, Echo the Dolphin was originally a big deal. It's the brainchild of Ed Annunziata, who spearheaded all the classic releases. Echo the Dolphin, The Tide of Times, Echo Jr. and The Great Ocean Treasure Hunt. Okay, maybe not that one. I've still to this day yet to meet anyone who had a Sega Pico. The first 2 titles are peak atmosphere. They're very simple, yet also very difficult. Echo wasn't afraid to not tell you a dang thing on what you needed to do, and when you're fighting against the creatures of the deep and the need to breathe, it kicks your butt. That was by design to fight against kids and their rentals, by the way, but Ed decided to up the ante a bit and have the entire thing go from yay, fun happy dolphin game to terrifying deep space alien horror with the fate of the planet at stake. If you were brave enough to get far as a kid, you were probably scarred. So, yay, Echo Jr.? Shoot forward to the turn of the century, the year 2000, and we're entering the 3D realm. Sega's Dreamcast might have had a strong start, and I may love it so, but it was on a sharp decline. Appaloosa, now without Annunziata, would put out a title that was, at the time, very impressive. Echo the Dolphin, Defender of the Future. It may not have come swinging in as hard as Sonic Adventure, it may not have had as much pizzazz as Jet Set Radio, or made me play it as much as Phantasy Star Online, but it's also one of the Dreamcast Dreamcast's most unique releases. One with a magazine ad campaign letting you know you'll need a reliable blowhole. Very good. Defender of the Future might be one of the best examples of a video game translating into 3D. It literally feels like they swung the camera and unveiled a whole new world. There's not many examples of that working. In this reboot, you play as, well, Echo, running around and doing dolphin things, like swimming, doing flips, killing sharks, getting crazy power-ups, becoming fully armored, traveling through time, and killing a giant alien monster from the inside, all while looking at loading screens that look like they could have been a Creed album's cover art. Oh yeah, don't forget about that one part where Echo turns into a spaceship and starts shooting lasers at aliens. This thing's wild. Defender of the Future is actually a pretty decent game, and I'm playing the PlayStation 2 version because it's got a couple of important enhancements. Number 1, Dolphin Echolocation GPS. When I said the original was a perfect translation, I meant the frustrations as well. Echo is a difficult series that likes to be incredibly vague on where you're supposed to go and what you're supposed to do, so I had to play this with a strategy guide to make sure I got through at a decent pace. Thankfully on this port, you can just press the left stick in and Echo will point his nose on where to go next. There's a lot to like here, and it was even gonna get a sequel, but the Dreamcast was already on the way out the door, so sadly, this got canceled. Though there is a prototype floating around on the web, which basically feels like more of the same. Echo is a really weird thing to exist. Tonally, it feels like it's trying to be really grand with high sci-fi concepts and massive narrative stakes, but if you just look at it, it's hard to take seriously. It's definitely a thing you wouldn't see Sega trying to do anything with in 2023, unless it's an April Fool's joke. Echo Water Wars 2, a game so good we didn't even need a first one. I kind of want to see this. Consoles and big publishers are fun and all, but what about ye old PC gaming? The mouse and keyboard offer a totally different style of interfacing with games that have led to entire franchises being absent from consoles. I mean, they tried with StarCraft 64. They sure tried. Speaking of real-time strategy games, where's Command & Conquer? It should be considered a felony to have the rights to Command & Conquer and not be doing anything with it. Westwood Studios' Command & Conquer was one of the premier PC series back in the 90s and mid-2000s. Be it the original, Red Alerts 1 and 2, or Tiberian Sun, these campy real-time strategy games were up there with StarCraft and Age of Empires. They had this charming hamminess that was thrown into the next dimension with FMV cutscenes. You gotta love Tim Curry.
Space!
The problem is, at a certain point after Westwood Studios was merged into Electronic Arts, they had absolutely no idea what to do with this series. They released a few on console, which was just not an ideal way to play this, but eventually made a proper Command & Conquer 4 subtitled Tiberian Twilight. And this thing was not good. EA was so focused on making this an esport that they forgot what Command & Conquer was supposed to be. It turned the strategic base building and unit handling into a King of the Hill styled class-based Zerg rush, and it's just unidentifiable to the originals. Then it also had that dreaded DRM on top of things, making it online only, and in a series that's had great single-player content, that's a no-no. There's technically been a few Command & Conquer titles over the last few years. You had the originals remastered in 2020 and a pair of forgettable mobile and browser games, but I'm not gonna count them. Frankly, some would say that ever since Westwood dissolved, that EA's never been able to truly innovate on or pull off Command & Conquer, and I'm probably in that boat. Also, Tiberian Sun's got a dope soundtrack. Played this thing for hours. When it comes to PC, it's not just Command & Conquer though. Other weirdly missing franchises include Tribes, Quake, and Unreal of all things. Tribes Ascend is technically shut down, Epic is delisting just about every Unreal title with no new one since 2014, and Quake is, well, Quake's got Quake Champions. It's a decent hero shooter version of Quake that will definitely satisfy that old Twitch shooter craving, but id Software's once premier flagship first-person shooter seems to have been put to the side in favor of Doom. It's pretty wild that the last actual retail Quake release was in 2007 with Enemy Territory Quake Wars, and that wasn't even id. Same with Quake 4, which was developed by Raven Software. And well, that actually brings us to our next titles, Hexen and Heretic. I do a lot with clones on this channel, and one of the earliest examples of that being used is with Doom, the Doom clone. After that thing's wild homegrown garage studio success, everyone wanted to make themselves a Doom clone. I'm sure everyone knows Duke Nukem 3D and maybe even Star Wars Dark Forces, but you may not know Heretic. But you should, considering they were the only ones with a giant "from the publisher of Doom" on the cover. After Doom became a major self-publishing success story, id very briefly decided they were going to try out the publishing thing themselves, and the only 3 titles they released were in the Heretic franchise. There's Heretic, Hexen Beyond Heretic, and Hexen 2. While some of these may visually look very much like Doom, the series was all about swords and sorcery, and had you picking a class and casting spells at 2D demon sprites. The different classes offer different gameplay styles, making it feel unique each time, and it was just a very solid one of these. Unfortunately, I never got to play it because when it came out, I was 4 and very sheltered, but if you get a chance to play one of these, they're great. Hexen actually came out on consoles, which unfortunately also meant a large amount of new players only got to see it through lackluster ports. The reviews were not kind.
No. This isn't right.
These 3 games are pretty well regarded, however, I think there's one more in the series that is often forgotten about. One that their new publisher refuses to port. In 1997, Raven Software was picked up by Activision, where they go on to make a ton of amazing games like X-Men Legends and Star Wars Jedi Academy. And they go on to get one last entry in the Heretic Hexen saga, simply called Heretic 2. Yeah, sticking with the ridiculous naming consistency. Heretic 2 is a bit of a black sheep, mostly because it said bye-bye to the first-person perspective and decided it was going to channel Tomb Raider.
No more.
Sticking with the swords and boards, you play as the main character from the first Heretic, making his way back from banishment, only to find out that you and everyone you know has been infected with a deadly plague. Typical British stuff. All of this topped off with radical CG cutscenes. It's good to know that Raven's cinematics were almost on par with the Scorpion King. After tinkering around for like 3 hours, I was finally able to get this to work on my machine by using a console command to skip the initial cutscene loads. It took a while to get this set up. Considering Activision won't port this, I had to use good old reliable abandonware.com and message board posts older than some of y'all to get this running. What I got was a pleasant surprise. Heretic 2 is a very unique game that goes in a pretty different direction than its predecessors. Being a third-person action game really changes a lot about its pacing and speed. Heretic takes the platforming up a notch and lets you get in melee range with your staff. There's also the Hell Staff, aka what if we make the concept of hell into a machine gun? This thing's fun. Though it's hard to aim because there's no cursor. Heretic 2 isn't perfect. It's got a lot of weird design choices in the levels and the visual variety isn't amazing, but I think it does a decent job of being a sequel to a formula that was a little overdone in the late 90s. It actually did pretty well in the reviews too, so clearly there was a demand for something that fell firmly in between Doom and Tomb Raider. I guess Activision didn't feel the same though, because immediately after this and the controversial Soldier of Fortune, Raven became one of their go-to studios for licensed games, which to be fair is an extremely good record. This would unfortunately be the end of Heretic, Hexen, and the Serpent Riders trilogy, as these 4 titles are just sitting around doing a whole lot of nothing. Heretic 2 remains unported, but I think there's a lot of potential here for a new, fresh entry in this sword and board style of shooter. I think we see a lot of that in Doom Eternal going in that direction, but I hope that one day I get to boot up a Heretic 3. It's just too bad the whole series has its rights held up between id Software, Activision, and Raven, meaning the only way we'll probably see a new one of these is if that Microsoft merger goes through, and that's not a great sentence.
You know what the I'm saying?
You know what has virtually nothing in common with Heretic? Nintendo. Well, minus Hexen 64, don't worry about that. But tonally and even genre-ly, Nintendo's not really one for those brutal, gory first-person shooters. They are, however, fans of making kick-ass video game franchises that fail to sell 10 million copies and then leaving them in the dirt forever. Those just also happen to be some of my all-time favorites too, like F-Zero. We mentioned it earlier, but for real, what's Nintendo doing with F-Zero? I don't know if it's because they want to only have a single racing franchise with Mario Kart, but I've always felt that the high speed and intensity of F-Zero was about as good as it got. I am a sucker for futuristic racers, I love big dumb anime dudes, and when you put that together with a killer soundtrack, you've got me for life. It's one of those rare series where you can pick any of them up and have yourself a baller time. Though if we were just picking one, it's GX, easy. Nintendo handed the reins over to Sega, say hi again, and they absolutely crushed it, giving us a top 5 GameCube title, my personal favorite arcade racer of all time, and bringing me back over and over. They just, made made this thing brutally hard, with some of the challenges launching the difficulty curve into the stratosphere at however fast that is. Contrary to what some people might think, this actually wasn't the last entry. In 2003, we'd get GP Legend as a tie-in to the anime. Yeah, the one where Captain Falcon does a Falcon punch so hard it sends shockwaves through the entire galaxy. Oh yeah, I should watch this. Then that got a sequel, which would be the final entry in the famous Future Racing franchise, 2004's F-Zero Climax, a Japanese exclusive. A little more expansion pack than a feature game. Climax is Mode 7 F-Zero gameplay perfected. It's challenging, it's got a killer visual look, and has everything that an F-Zero needs. There's also a create a track mode and the ability to play with friends via link cables. If you were going to be doing some racing on the go, there was really no better way. It doesn't reach the highs that Sega's GX did, but that's not really a fair comparison. I just think that it's absolutely crazy that this released nearly 20 years ago. Almost 20 years with no new humanoid versions of anthropomorphic Nintendo characters, and that is a huge shame. Including spin-offs, I don't know how we got 3 Splatoons, 8 Animal Crossings, 14 Fire Emblems, and close to 60 different Pokemon titles between Climax and now, but the answer is probably in the sales figures. There were apparently discussions on bringing a new F-Zero to the Wii U sometime in the mid-2010s, though I'm just thinking that modern Nintendo isn't too hot on making something challenging with a lot of barriers of entry. Yup, straight up, F-Zero is too freaking good to be absent for this long and without any ports of GX. What are we doing here, guys? That's probably my most obvious choice anyways. Nintendo has tons of franchises that are needing some love, and even more single game IPs that people probably want to see a sequel to, or something. I know there's like 10 people out there who would totally love a new Urban Champion, and even more clamoring for a new Mother, but I'd really like to see a new Pilot Wings. Bonus points to Golden Sun. Nintendo seems to make JRPGs and trilogies, and just like Mother 3, this thing would end with the third release in 2010, Dark Dawn. Though to be fair, there's a lot of abandoned JRPG franchises. We'll come back to those one day, because I want to get into the exact opposite of that, a flight sim. And no, I'm not talking about Star Fox, even if I'd love to rip into that. I asked on Twitter what people's favorite abandoned game franchises were, and a shocking amount of people answered Star Fox. Zero was 7 years ago, and that's just sad, but it's still more recent than a new Pilot Wings. I think Nintendo sees Pilot Wings specifically as a tech demo, something to demonstrate their new hardware with. There's only been 3 of them, the Super Nintendo Original, Pilot Wings 64, and Pilot Wings Resort. They're always relatively short, launch titles, and have some of the dopest lo-fi video game music out there. There's multiple vehicles that have different goals, like going through rings, landing jet gliders, or whatever the thing may be. 64 is a game that I always thought had a ton of personality, and the characters were all so visually diverse. The music is something I could put on in a fancy hotel lobby and no one would notice. They might just notice that the N64 couldn't swap models mid-flight, so sometimes it looks like you have a long ass. Yo, same though. So, Pilot Wings Resort. I don't like how much the 3DS is coming up in this video for franchise graveyards, but okay. 2011's Pilot Wings Resort wanted to showcase the visual prowess of this tiny handheld, and I think it did a good job of that. It's also a bit of a combination Wii Sports Resort and Pilot Wings, as they allow you to use Mii's and explore Woohoo Island from all those games. With this, you can now fly around on the go. However, Resort does feel like a big step back from the Nintendo 64 release in regards to like things to do. In 1999, it was acceptable, but this one still only has 3 different modes of transportation. There's some slight differences in some of the levels, but it really lacks the minigame variety that its predecessor had. I was really hoping to shoot my Mii out of a cannon into random floating targets on the horizon as they made Godzilla noises, but whatever. Real ones know the Mario Wario jump scare. Probably explains why I have an irrational fear of humanoid monuments. One fear. At this point, it's been 12 years without a new Pilot Wings, and I don't think Nintendo will ever see the need to revisit the series. Unless they decide to take a dip into VR, which I seriously doubt. Speaking of, if you ever get a chance to play it, that VR Ultra Wings game is basically that. And it only makes my hunger grow stronger. The Nintendo Switch has seen the revival of a lot of obscure series like Famicom Declective? What? Famicom Detective Club, and even Marvel Ultimate Alliance, which is actually pretty sweet. I'm sure a lot of the Nintendo faithful are gonna be like, Pilot Wings? Really? So, How about a new Star Tropics? Hey, look, someone's gonna take the 2D Zelda role. Link sure won't. Keeping a wild card, let's bring back Steel Diver. Who's with me? I don't know if it's because I'm an absolute freak or not, but a lot of the video games that I hold near and dear to my heart are ones that are totally obscure. I'm sure a lot of y'all also experienced this, but growing up, we would always rent games over buying them because it was more cost efficient. So young me would reach out, grab a copy of Gex Enter the Gecko, and eventually think, wow, that was a seminal classic. I can't wait for the sequel. And it was great. If I've learned one thing, it's that all kids are dumb, myself included. At the same time, when are we getting another Crimson Skies? Yeah, I know, another plain game. I don't know many people who owned a classic Xbox as a kiddo, but every single one I meet is a kindred spirit. The exclusives and highest reviewed stuff you'd get on that console were all over the place, but it wasn't just Halo and Halo 2 as Microsoft and the internet might have you believe. If you were an Xbox kid, you had Mad Dash Racing and Bloodwake, and you loved it. That being said, there was nothing quite like Crimson Skies High Road to Revenge, a sequel to a PC game based on a board game. It's a very simple concept. You fly planes, engage in dogfights, and if you like miniature aviation vehicles, this is for you. The tabletop release has been out of print for over 20 years, so I obviously had no way to play it. Skies was created by FASA Corporation, who's also responsible for Shadowrun and MechWarrior. There's a lot of licensing and legal jargon being tossed around here, but the short of it is Microsoft now has the game rights to Crimson Skies, and they haven't done anything with it in 20 years, despite High Road to Revenge being one of the best games on their own platform. If you're a fan of Phantom Dust, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The biggest difference between this and Pilot Wings is that Crimson Skies isn't a sim in the slightest. It's a very high-speed action take on an alternate 1930s that's swimming in its love for a diesel punk aesthetic. It's like taking Star Fox, blending it with a more open level structure, and giving you a nice plane variety to shake up each encounter. You want to fly a gyrocopter? Sure. You want a plane that shoots lightning? You got it. High Road to Revenge has a great campaign that takes you through several different stages, each with little quests you can do. These will put you in different combat scenarios, vehicles, and tense situations to keep things interesting. This honestly feels ahead of its time. The sense of being able to fly around these seemingly massive worlds while interacting with characters you barely see brought a scale that you rarely saw. I was pulling off cool barrel rolls, shooting down other planes, and zooming through tight spaces, and even though the campaign's pretty short, it held my attention the whole time. Multiple times. Then there's the multiplayer, which was a ton of fun. It's not playable online anymore, and instead you're greeted with a very sad pop-up, but at least Microsoft knew enough to make this backwards compatible on the Series X. It looks and feels great in HD. It just didn't have the sales to warrant a sequel, as the attach rate on the original Xbox was apparently only around 1%. That's not good, but f them. Let's bring it back, baby. If you've got a method of playing this thing, do it. All right, let's get away from planes and other vehicles. My bad. Although I was considering doing Road Rash for a second. But speaking of things that I hold near and dear to my heart, whatever happened to Lufia? I must have rented Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals 5 times back to back when I was a babbo, and for good reason. It was a fantastic RPG with fun, memorable characters and a story that went places. It's actually a prequel to the first Lufia. That one opens up with the main cast of 2 finishing their quest, so the developers gave themselves a pretty hard narrative task and pulled it off. Battles were fast-paced. The dungeons had a lot of neat puzzles to solve, making it less straightforward. Combat sprites were done differently than other titles, and you could even recruit a monster friend to help you in fights. The main cast had a lot of intertwining drama, and I think this might have been the first game I played with romance in the plot. It was pretty ambitious for the time for sure. It's just, I don't think I've ever met anyone who's actually played any of these. Just goes to show that as a kid, your perception of what's popular or good is totally askew. Now, here's where things get tricky. The Lufia franchise, aka Estopolis Denki in Japan, was developed by a group called Neverland, the original team behind Rune Factory. But it was technically a Taito property, who are now Square Enix. There were 2 smaller titles on the Game Boy Color and Advance in the early 2000s, a handful of canceled things, and then nothing until 2010, when out of nowhere, a wild Nintendo DS game appears. Lufia Curse of the Sinistrals is how a remake should be done. Co-developed by Square and some of the original staff, Curse takes the concept and story of 2 and repacks it into a portable action RPG that, in my opinion, successfully did the thing. Rather than attempting to replace the classic, it did a lot of paying homage and expanding on concepts that couldn't have been done on older hardware. It is, however, a lot more linear because of that. Dungeons lean even heavier into the puzzle aspect with character-specific tools, and these anime kids have a lot of dialogue. Voice acting too. I love that the intro to this is basically the big bad yelling, "Come and get me, idiots."
Dare one of you challenge me? I am invincible, indestructible.
You know, the thought of voiceovers on the Nintendo DS has my expectations incredibly low thanks to Suikoden Tear Crease, but Lufia's was charming and gave a lot more personality to the quieter characters from the original. Couple that with some fantastic redesigns by Yusuke Nara of The Last Remnant fame, and you've got yourself a super underrated title. The change from turn-based to action RPG combat was jarring for sure, but they found a way to make it work in a way that's actually pretty similar to the Ys franchise, just with the limits of it being on a handheld. There's a lot of love put into the world that you wouldn't notice normally, but if you emulate this and pump the resolution up, you get it all in stunning 4K. Curse of the Sinistrals got a lot of positive reviews and hit that sweet nostalgia spot for at least a couple of people, just not enough considering it was a financial bomb. You know it's bad when multiple Xbox 360 games are outselling you on your launch week in Japan. As you can probably imagine, that would be the current end of the Lufia franchise. I would love for this to change because I think it's a world that has a lot of potential. We just gotta hope that Square Enix decides to pull a Live Alive and give this one more shot with a slightly bigger budget. Is it likely? Maybe? I got hopium. I'm here. Now you may be asking yourself, what do Crimson Skies and Lufia have in common that made me put them in the same section? And I don't know. I just miss them. When it comes to things that I thought were a huge deal as a kid, at the very least, Konami has acknowledged Suikoden.
Oh well, whatever. I guess it was just my imagination playing tricks on me.
I think that it's time to talk about Capcom. Like Konami, they have some of the most recognizable game franchises on the planet, and I also feel like they don't know what to do with a lot of them. Some of them last multiple decades. It's not every day you see something last from the 80s till now, and we got Street Fighter 6 coming out like soon. When you think of Capcom, you probably think of that, Resident Evil and Mega Man, but there's so much more. Like Dino Crisis. We started last week's video with dinosaurs, we're ending this one with them. Dino Crisis 1 and 2 were a good duology. You played as killer redhead Regina as she survived, probably in horror, an onslaught of dinosaurs. The first one had famed game director Shinji Mikami doing what he does best, and the sequel was an excellent follow-up. Depending on who you ask, maybe even better. It really is a timeless concept, so when Capcom, the masters of survival horror, announced Dino Crisis 3 for the original Xbox, we all got excited. They just happened to make this.
Why did you attack the Saber? Where did those dinosaur monsters come from? Say something!
Now, I know the first two had like a lot of guns, but this is just over the top. Dino Crisis 3 takes place in a space station where you have not just infinite ammo, but jetpacks, boosting abilities, and options, like Gradius options. There's just no way you can play this and be slightly afraid unless it's at how frustrating the entire game is. Dinosaurs spawn in like it's team deathmatch. The camera angles are still predetermined, so you're constantly getting jumped off screen. All the time, too. You're getting smacked out of nowhere, and sometimes 3 hits will kill ya. Not to mention combat scenarios aren't like 1 or 2 dinosaurs. It's the Royal Rumble up in here. This entire thing takes place in this space station, so a majority of the time you're running around this incredibly dull looking environment, unsure of what to do. I love it when the camera changes when I'm making a big jump. I also love having limited lives. Dino Crisis 3 is one of the only cases in this video of a game being received so poorly that a publisher essentially nixed the whole dang franchise. After playing it for a few hours, I totally understood. The idea of fighting dinosaurs in space is actually one of the coolest concepts humanity has ever thought of. But the end result is this frustrating, hard to navigate or comprehend time that'll have you shooting enemies off screen and just hoping it hits. As it turns out, people didn't like this one. It's been 20 years since Dino Crisis 3, so I'm just gonna assume Capcom's like, yeah, nah. But they at least understand how much dinosaurs rule because Exoprimal's out in a few months. Is it connected? I hope so, but I will try it out of sheer obligation to my 10-year-old self. Speaking of being 10, how about that Breath of Fire? What's going on with that, huh? Alongside Lufia, these were a huge deal to me as a kid, and it's ridiculous that the last one of these was the free-to-play browser-based Breath of Fire 6, something completely unlike the rest of the franchise. It was Japanese only and shut down in 2017, so the last actual game was Dragon Quarter all the way back in 2003. So I ask one word, Capcom. Why? I actually already talked about a lot of cool stuff back in my old Forgotten Capcom Games video, and while I'd love to see like a new Tech Romancer, it was never a full franchise. That being said, we did talk about Mega Man, specifically Legends, and how it's a total shame that this one's been stuck on older consoles. We did just get the Mega Man Battle Network collection, so never say never. What else? Oh yeah, Beautiful Joe. I would love a new Beautiful Joe, but I think that faded away alongside Clover Studio. Rest in peace. Which leaves us with one major Capcom franchise to talk about, and you might not know the one. So for our last series of the day, you know what has disappeared? The Capcom Versus franchise. No, like actually. Capcom used to team up with other publishers and media companies all the time, and they would create all kinds of dope games that you wouldn't really see anywhere else. Starting initially with X-Men vs. Street Fighter, which is one of my favorite fighting games of all time. Every year or so, you would see a Capcom versus something, and it was usually guaranteed to be a banger. X-Men, SNK, Marvel, Namco, Tatsunoko, Tekken, Japan Sumo Cup Yokozuna. This was kind of in the same realm as the Project Cross Zone titles too. With the way gaming works and guest characters just being a regular thing now, the last true versus Capcom title is actually Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. And that's pretty unfortunate. I never actually played it before, so I sat down with it, and much to my surprise, Infinite was alright. Mechanically, it had some interesting stuff going on. I like how you can pick any of the Infinity Stones to use in combos, some throwing projectiles, others being gap closers. The 2v2 format slowed down the pace from 3 slightly and allowed for more unique fighter combinations. Honestly, I can sit down, play this for a while, and probably have a decent amount of fun with it. It's just also one of the ugliest games I've ever looked at, which is weird because some of the unlockable concept art looks decent. I mean, look at Gamora. This is good. What happened? If you were supposed to look like a normal human in any regard, pack it up. The only decent designs in 3D were the ridiculous ones like Mega Man, Rocket Raccoon, Ultron, you get the idea. MVCI looks uncanny valley, and it's hard to get over its complete lack of style and pizzazz. The music is forgettable, the stages are mostly bland besides the Wakanda mashup, and the menu design feels dated. I don't know how this thing came out after UMVC and lacked style, but they did it. On top of that, the biggest knock against it was the roster. How your series is literally rooted in X-Men vs. Street Fighter and fails to include a single mutant is beyond me. I do enjoy playing as Black Widow though, she's pretty fun. Also Rocket all day, my boy. Infinite came out in 2017, meaning it's been a solid 6 years since Capcom decided to verse anything, and I think that's a huge shame. Thankfully, it seems like Street Fighter 6 is gonna rule, Disney's letting companies use their properties again, and business might pick up, so maybe Capcom will want to start swinging. The Capcom Versus series is definitely something I want to see more of. Bring back Tatsunoko for real, that game rules. But quick, my top 5 Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite 2 character picks. Ghost Spider, Jean from God Hand, Cosmic Ghost Rider, Ryu from Breath of Fire 4, and Magic Ileana Rasputin. Midnight Suns has ruined me.
Fine, I will cut the cake.
And so, there you have it. A bunch of abandoned and dead video game franchises. It's kind of a sad video, I know, but I also hope that it does a decent job in shining a light on, you know, abandoned game franchises and things that people might have forgotten about. Did I just do like 100 hours of work to talk about Lufia and Crimson Skies? You decide. But I think it's fun to go back and see what game franchises people hold near and dear. Y'all know mine. What are some of y'all's? Let me know down below. I actually ended up cutting a lot of games out of this video because the runtime was getting too long, so I'll probably make another one of these if y'all like it. Let me know. If you liked today's video and want to support the channel, make sure to check out today's sponsor, support the Patreon, become a YouTube member, or buy a t-shirt. You can subscribe, turn on notifications with the bell, or just leave a hateful comment, which I'm sure some of y'all already have done. All of your generous support goes back into the channel, and I gotta say, my editors are killing it. Shout out to them. We're working pretty hard over here to make sure we have enough content coming out in June, because that month is going to be the end of us all. Have you seen how many games are coming out? Godspeed. Anyways, I've been Austin, and I'm gonna go back into my work hole, so catch me next time when we talk about something a little happier. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Aaron Kwolek, Blackfoot Ferret, Blake Thomas, Cheeks, Chris Shelton, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Idlewise, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Karen Arter, Nick Irving, Ryan Talbert, and Vox. Thank you all so much for your generous support. Yeah, what's that? 3 videos in May? That's crazy. And we're not done yet. For real, when I said a lot of things were coming out in June, video game wise, I meant it. I want to play Final Fantasy 16. I need the time. There's going to be more individual deep dives coming up as well as compilation videos in the next few months, including one that I'm still thinking about doing. It depends. For now, I'm going to take a huge nap, also known as a sleep. Goodbye.